So I think we'll make a start with our next speaker of today. So we have Mr. John Alter, who will be giving a talk titled Bringing Antibiotics Back from the Brink, Catalysing Innovation and Investment to Take on AMR. So John is currently the head of external affairs at the AMR Action Fund, but he previously was with Pfizer for over 20 years, where he was involved in multiple facets of the antibiotic drug development and sales. So for example, he contributed to shaping the world's first subscription model for antibiotics and worked on several other innovative contracts during his tenure with Pfizer. Immediately prior to joining the fund, John was also the vice president of patient and health impact for Pfizer's hospital business unit, which covered a portfolio of 170 molecules, including 50 medicines on the WHO's essential medicines list and dozens of anti-infective and antifungal drugs, as well as some drug delivery systems. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome John to the stage. Thank you very much. No problem.
Thank you, Martin. And thank you to the Trinity AMR Action Group. I feel AMR and action is something that we both have in common. So very much happy to be here.
On it, I think.
Yeah. So, as many people have kind of said, when we talk about antibiotics, you have to think, back to the beginning. And so with penicillin, and so this is a poster back from the days of World War II, and it's been kind of stated now that antibiotics have been one of the greatest advances in therapeutic medicine. And again, we all want to talk about patient outcomes. So, penicillin reduced the mortality among allies by as much as 15%. And it's currently estimated that antibiotics add an average of 20 years to our life expectancy. And they're a foundational part. So it makes modern medicine possible, from elective surgery that you may have to chemotherapy, as our first speaker kind of talked about, and also safe childbirth. And so it's wonderful to think about that today. You hate to think about what life would be like if we reverted back to the way it was. And so because of this, that's why our fund is focused on investing in new antimicrobial therapies. So as I said, World War II kind of sparked that golden age of antibiotics. To help meet the demand for all the sailors and soldiers, there were 21 different medical penicillin plants producing 100 billion units. So whether those are tablets or vials or whatever, but it's 100 billion a month. And that's just a massive number. It did meet a significant unmet medical need at the time, and antibiotics were the breakthrough therapies of their time. It became a key part of the revenue stream for many companies. Upwards of more than half of their revenues were coming from that, and they used the proceeds of those sales to invest in not just more antibiotic R&D, but started funding other therapies as we got into cancer and heart medicines and things like that. Someone mentioned before about soil samples, so I thought I'd just pass this interesting note. So Eli Lilly had launched a discovery effort, and they required employees to take tubes with them and scoop up soil samples and bring them back to their headquarters in Indianapolis whenever they traveled. And you just think about if people would do something like that today. I think the river samples are becoming the modern equivalent of that. And so, of course, this gentleman here never would have imagined he would have been the subject of a musical that was touring the world that Dame Sally referred to. But this is, of course, Alexander Fleming. But when he was accepting his Nobel Prize, speech, basically spoke of drug resistance. And I think at the time, again, this was still such a relatively new, people really didn't understand what a prognostication this would be, and how dangerous it has really become on a worldwide basis. I think Mariah showed a very comparable slide, to this, but basically top half of the chart shows when these various antibiotics were introduced. And sadly, on the bottom half of the chart, it shows when resistance would start to form. And even most recently, there's a product that's part of the UK pilot subscription program, cefiderocol. It was approved for use in just April of 2020, and resistance to that product is already present. So that's less than 30 months. And so this really becomes the issue that Fleming warned about back in 1945. So again, discovery does get harder and forced many pharma companies to exit this space. Just to give a few statistics there. Part of it was there was some, I'll call it low-hanging fruit, a lot of the easier compounds and second generation products, those had already been kind of worked through in the 50s and 60s. And so just one example, over this time period, 1995 to 2001, so GSK conducted 70 high throughput screenings of almost 500,000 compounds, but yielded no candidates for development. And these are the things, when you expend such resources, it becomes harder and harder to justify, should we keep doing more of it, or are we going to expect to get the same outcomes? In addition to the research challenges, the commercial challenges have become even more significant. So of course, antibiotics are typically a short treatment duration. They cost, on average, more than $1 billion. And again, this is including all the failures that go into it, as Mariah was also talking about. You go through different compounds and different options with the hopes of kind of developing that one lead compound. And the other issue here is the timeline, right? So this is not talking about producing mRNA vaccines, which again were based on almost 30 years of development in to come to where that they were for BioNTech and Moderna. So again, the typical antibiotic pipeline, it takes about 10 to 15 years. The other issue that we've talked about is stewardship earlier today. And so, of course, new antibiotics are used sparingly to help conserve their effectiveness. But of course, little use means little sales. And I've got some statistics in just a few slides that really kind of speak to that. And so, of course, at the beginning of 1990, there were 18 of the large pharmaceutical companies had active antibiotic programs. In just a few decades later, that's down to 6. So as I kind of said, the marketplace for antibiotics is broken. And one of the reasons is that the current market measures a drug's value based on its sales volume. And so, of course, that works very well when we're talking about COVID vaccines or different, heart medications or oncology medications, that if you have good science, the market will move there and companies get rewarded, through that. Of course, the issue with antibiotics is you can have good science, but you, because of stewardship and resistance, want to, restrict the usage. And so volume really isn't the way companies need to be rewarded. And NICE, when they look at their societal value, they use the acronym STEADY. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but again, you're looking at spectrum and enablement of other medications, diversity, and insurance there. So again, back to some statistics. So the US revenue for the top 10 antimicrobial products is, you see there, 644 million. And I think the mean or median, I forget which number, is only about 46 million for one product sales. Compare that to a product like Humira, whose, again, one product had sales of 13 billion. And then, of course, approval of an antimicrobial in one market doesn't yield the registration in all markets, as our colleague that's been doing research in Ghana was explaining. And so I've got a slide here that talks just a little bit more in detail about that. So it starts at the bottom of the most recent 17 approvals in the United States. It kind of says what that same approval level is. Of course, the UK, not so bad at 11 out of 17. Look at the Canadian. So, I mean, the market physically closest to the United States has the worst access. And again, the products are the same, but that speaks to some of the fundamental issues of their healthcare system, and again, about access of antibiotics. So again, that lack of pipeline has been noticed by private equity and those that fund, and you will see the blue bar here represents the funding of oncology products over the last decade. And you see that's a significant increase, as where the investments in the antibacterial space basically remains flat at somewhere on average between $100 and $150 million a year. That, of course, translates to what you see in the pipeline. And so in the pipeline, there are over 2,000 phase 1 oncology trials right now. There's over 3,000 phase 2 clinical trials. Does anybody have an idea how many clinical trials are ongoing for antibacterials right now? You're very close. I'll give you the exact figure here. So the WHO, in their most recent annual pipeline report, says there are 77 antibacterials in various stages of development. 45 of those are considered the traditional antibiotic, 32 of those are non-traditional. Of those 45 traditional antibiotics, only 27 of them target the WHO priority pathogens. And of those 27, sadly, most will not make it through clinical testing. And the BIO organization, which is one of the trade associations in the United States, has gathered data that about 80% of all new development for antimicrobials is being done by small biotech companies. And this is the focus of the fund. And I'll talk a little bit about the fund in just a minute. And of course, as we said, the pipeline's just about at its lowest, where unfortunately AMR and the threat of AMR is at its highest. And many of these stats have been covered one way or another today, but just to hit on again, the 1.27 million deaths that were in the Graham paper. Again, sadly, 1 in 5 of these deaths are in children under the age of 5. And as mentioned earlier, that COVID has led to a spike that we've seen in both hospital-acquired AMR as well as death. And then, of course, the figure from the O'Neill report of 10 million, and how we're tracking, I think, faster than that. So as I mentioned, the clinical pipeline is declining. And this just again highlights, even within a decade, it's been declining even more rapidly. So as I said, what to do about it? Well, that's the AMR Action Fund. We were created back in 2020. And our mission is to invest in the clinical development of novel antibiotics, to bridge them to the commercialization phase, and also giving time for policymakers around the world to enact reforms that will provide pull incentives that we hope will reestablish a sustainable market. And so the two main functions of the fund, of course, is to invest in companies, and secondly, to advocate for change. And that really is what we're trying to do. And so when we talk about different type of incentives, so one is called a push incentive, which again is to energize in the very early parts of preclinical development. And then as they move from the preclinical to clinical, of course, that's when the costs start to increase. And that's when the fund is stepping in to try to fund the most promising technologies and science that's there. So the pull incentives get them through the pipeline and available to be commercialized. And there is, of course, growing momentum amongst the G7 markets, as the Dame Sally implored. But again, to put it in perspective, people estimate that just one global pull incentive is estimated to cost about $3+ billion. So a little bit on kind of a report card or scorecard of where things are today. So again, kudos to NHS England for being the world's first subscription, or Dame Sally called it Netflix model. So again, the idea there is you get paid a certain amount irrespective of the amount of usage. And that's the same way Netflix charges you, just one amount, no matter whether you watch just one show or you're binging for a whole rainy weekend like it is today. Sweden has another model, but again, it is not so much focused on innovation. It's really to address that issue of access. And again, Sweden was kind of in the middle of the pack there. They're not ones. So like, sadly, you don't see Canada on there, and a country that's got one of the biggest needs has yet to pursue a pilot like that. In the US, Dame Sally referred to the PASTEUR Act. It's legislation that's been introduced, and as she referenced, yes, it delinks volume. So they're looking to pay a certain amount. And again, that's a scaled amount depending on a number of criteria. But that hopefully will get a vote before the end of this calendar year. If not, they'll have to reload and try again. And then in Europe, they have the pharmaceutical regulation that's currently undergoing revision, and that addresses many, many aspects. One piece of that is to stimulate antibiotic development, and that's called a transferable exclusivity that basically allows a small biotech, they get granted a waiver and to extend the patent. It's of less value to an antibiotic developer, but again, we talked about Humira. I think a company like AbbVie would be willing to pay a lot to acquire such a waiver, and that's that exchange that then becomes the return for the antibiotic developer and gives them the lifeblood funds that they need to continue with other development programs, or again, to invest it other ways. So again, I mentioned the fund, my employer, that's the largest public-private partnership that's investing in antibiotics. We were created through the vision of the World Health Organization, the Wellcome Trust. We've received funds from the European Investment Bank, as well as from a number of pharmaceutical companies, some of them still doing research of their own, but some of these also see the value of the antibiotics and don't want them to disappear, and so have funded us. So far, the fund has made 2 investments. So one in adaptive phage therapeutics. So we talked a little bit about phage, and Mariah used a nice graphic so you can visualize what the phage looks like. Again, you see they have roughly 65 full-time employees, so a relatively small group. They have a phage bank that's got hundreds of bacteriophages, and they also have a rapid diagnostic, and we heard about the importance of rapid diagnostics earlier today. The second company, Venatorex, has, again, approximately 80 full-time employees, so not large either. They have a more traditional beta-lactam, beta-lactamase inhibitor product, but again, has showed some very strong patient data. They hopefully will be filing that with the regulatory authorities in early next year. Adaptive phage is just in phase 1 of their patient trials. And that's not the only activities that the industry is doing besides the fund. You may have read that GARDP, Shionogi, and the Clinton Health folks have a partnership to get cefiderocol in, I think it's 135 low and middle income countries, and we wish them much success in that. You may have seen that recently GSK had some very positive phase 3 results. They were able to stop their trial early. And they've made a sizable investment in a company named Spiro, which is in Boston. And so hopefully those will be medicines that come to the market in the coming years. Also, another company, Boehringer Ingelheim, has partnered with 2 other companies, Evotec and Biomerieux. I think you saw them when we were talking about diagnostics earlier. So they formed a joint venture that's called Aurabac, and they will be focused on drug development and diagnostic development. And then lastly, I use the example, and Dame Sally, again, we talked about surveillance. So a group of companies, and they're listed here, they are participating in an AMR register and data sharing program. So these are some of the activities that are ongoing. So kind of in summary, as we've seen, antibiotics have been around for about 100 years, but sadly, so has resistance. Antibiotics are a foundational medicine. The current market is broken, resulting in reduced investment and a near dry pipeline. And my message, pull incentives from the G7 governments are required, and the time to act is now. So with that, happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Development cost is $1 million per antibiotic. Will you break down for where exactly those costs are?
So the question was about the cost of that. So in the beginning, the early stage would be, where you're doing modeling and just running through it. Those costs aren't so high. Those are kind of in the, I'll say, a few million, dollars. It's really as you enter the clinic and from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. And so, of course, phase 3, right before the registration, is where the costs are the highest. And those can be, hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's all dependent on the size of the trial. And so the number of patients that need to be recruited. Again, all of those get discussed with the regulatory authorities like the FDA and the EMA in terms of what are they looking for when you produce the data finally to register the product. But I kind of, it's about logarithmic as you kind of work your way up between preclinical and then phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And again, it also, as I said, includes much of the cost of the failure up front, right? Because again, on average, unfortunately, approval kind of from where you start to where you finish, it's still in the low single digits percentage of success. And so you have to have a lot to begin with to hopefully get that 1 or 2 products at the end.
So you mentioned first you said that most of the antimicrobials are small molecules. I think the trends are changing now. So, and you mentioned adalimumab, which is like near massive cells, and that's an antibody. So is there any push towards making novel antimicrobials using antibodies?
Yeah, so again, the question was talking about the traditional versus kind of, I'll say, non-traditional or small molecule versus large molecule. Look, like for CARB-X as an example, which again is funding a lot of that early stage work, they are investing across the board, right? mAbs, small molecule combinations, they're investing a lot of it. I think it will, we hope, that the science will really advance in a number of different areas. And again, bacteriophage is another area that people are exploring. I mean, there are a number of companies. There's one in Copenhagen, there's one in California, there are more and more of those. And again, maybe based on the bright minds that are here in the audience, the next real big breakthrough may be, only a few years away, right? So that's the hope that we have to have. You have to be an optimist. And I think for those of you that are here and supporting AMR, I think you are optimists, but you have to be an optimist to stay in this field. Sorry. Oh, okay. Yes.
So I guess this is more follow-on from the previous question as well. So are you seeing any trend in revisiting the older, like for example, chloramphenicol, for example? Are you seeing any trend in revisiting those that phased out, but potentially could?
Yeah, there are absolutely companies that are looking at older products, or again, products that have been used for a certain indication, and they are now getting run through to see if they would apply to have some additional indications that will be helped in the fight against AMR. And so that's absolutely a element or a subsection of companies that are looking at those type of products. Yep. Sorry, there's one.
Thanks very much, since the role of the AMR action fund, we are also dealing with regulators on things like the design of trials in terms of superiority versus non-inferiority, because that, I believe, there's recently a phase 3 trial that failed on this because it was failed for superiority. So that seems to actually be non-inferiority.
Yeah, I mean, so I'd say, the fund itself, we work with the portfolio companies and try to help in the design of those trials and have, advisors that have, many years of experience to try to help with that. I think, ethically, it's hard to move away from a non-inferiority, trial. And so, and that's, I think, one of the things that, we talked about the kind of health technology assessments or things that are designed to assign a value to a product. And if you're purely looking at, well, gee, this product says it's non-inferior, how can I charge, how can you value it differently? And I think that's where you have to take these other factors into account. And so, of course, we're having discussions with not just the regulators, but again, bodies like NICE and ICER in the United States and some of the others about looking at things differently. Because again, if you look at them the way you've always looked at them, how is the future going to be any different than the present with such the low level of the pipeline? So we're trying to educate folks on that. Sorry, one other question.
You mentioned in your talk the fact that cancer drugs are getting a lot more funding than antimicrobials. How do kind of other areas of research, things like painkillers or antidepressants, how does that funding?
So I don't know about some of those. I mean, I will say that while I showed data about oncology, rare disease, autoimmune, some of these areas are equally, they are attracting private equity there. I think, the private equity follows, I think, the combination of good science and good profits, right? And so I think with antibiotics, you can definitely demonstrate good science. The problem is you can't necessarily demonstrate good profits from that. And because of that, they go where it can. And again, that's why it's so important to get the governments to change how they reward the developers of antimicrobials, so that it can be, and they can compete again for that equity. Because as I said, I think there's some wonderful science that's there that is being overlooked by private equity today. Sorry, there was one question in the back, and then I'll get to you, Mariah.
Yeah, I was just curious about the 77 antibacterials in development. And you said that only 27 of them target the priority or ones identified as priority pathogens. I was curious as to why that might be the case and what they look like. It must be quite a varied answer. The other ones seems easier.
No, I wouldn't say easier. It's that, because again, the issue of unmet medical need can fit into that area, right? So some developers are looking at an area of unmet medical need, which may not be, like Dame Sally referred to these, 6 priority, pathogens that cover 72%. So that's kind of trying to, if you're going to focus your area, maybe focus it where the need may be able to be addressed larger, but there are still some areas of unmet medical need. And so many of the companies that are working on those say, look, I'm working in an area of unmet medical need. It's just not one of the pathogens identified by the WHO. We, unfortunately, our charter is to focus on those priority pathogens, either on the WHO list or the CDC list. And so while we may agree those are good, equally good science, we are focused on those. Yes.
I was wondering if there have been any studies actually assessing, because antibiotics are used not just for antimicrobials, but also enabling other treatments, because there's so much investment in things like oncology. Have there been any efforts to try and link the value of antimicrobials to oncology drugs? So you can say, well, yes, you get money straight from oncology, but unless you have antimicrobials to help you enable its use.
We've just started some work as part of a cancer consortium that is doing some data analysis there, and that's also with UICC. And that hopefully will get published next year. I think right now it's more the opposite. That's what's happening, that rather than see the positive link, you can be a cancer patient and you can be successfully treated for your oncology condition, and you will die of an infection. Infection's the second largest cause of death for oncology patients behind the actual cancer itself. And so, yeah, again, you would think that groups like NHS England or NICE would factor all of that into their evaluation. Again, today they don't, but that's also, I think, part of the pilot that is ongoing. That so these first 2 products are a pilot. They are looking at more comprehensive reform, and I think that's scheduled for next year, that they will release and add additional products to the system, and more of these kind of Netflix subscription models. But that, I would say, more to come in 2023 from England. And again, England really is, and I think a lot of that's built on the passion and work of Dame Sally and some of her peers. They're ahead, right? Where are the other 200 nations in this fight against AMR? 2 more questions. Okay, Martin, it's up to you to cut them off whenever you want. Yes.
You mentioned that I think 6 out of the 18 pharma companies you said are still in the fight to bring new antimicrobials. to the market. Your fund has obviously managed to bring together quite a lot of pharma companies as investors. Are you seeing interest from them in getting back into that fight on the development side?
I think, again, if we kind of work through the downward and work to a more optimistic future, I believe if some of these incentives can be put in place, I believe you will see more of the big pharmaceutical returning there. Because again, they're today having their own kind of internal competition for resources, and again, there are wonderful development programs in the areas of, as I said, oncology and rare disease, and again, there's a lot of Alzheimer's research going on, right now, right? And so it's how does antibiotics, I'll say for lack of a better, compete against some of these other disciplines? And a lot of that's based on, I'll say, the business case that's associated with it, right? Unmet medical need is part of it, and these are for-profit enterprises that have investors looking for returns as well. So that's just the reality. Yes.
You described the three financial models, like the pay subscription model. Which one do you think can be the most effective?
I mean, I think a number of them, can be effective. And I'll say from the fund's point of view, we don't have a preference what incentive model gets put in place, as long as an incentive model gets put in place. Again, the Pasteur one is designed on a kind of a subscription basis. Japan is supposed to be working on one that we should learn about in their next fiscal year, which starts the 1st of April, so next year. We've heard that one of the provinces in Canada is working on a model, but we don't know the details of that yet. And again, at a European level, so the transferable exclusivity that's something that the European Commission can implement. But again, that requires still some effort at the market level. So, what does France want to do, or what does Germany want to do? What does Italy want to do? That'll all be up to what works best for them.
Great. If there's no more questions, then John, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure.